What about endorsing us to sponsor you becoming a product yourself now? If that means slaving away your freedom of mind, freedom of choice to trade it in for a hero, but it's really corporate worship, when it boils down to spending irresponsibly and companies taking advantage of your consuming to fatten up your ideas and perception for the comfort to ease the pain from the day to day, only to force you to fasten while fasting the moral compass, ready to slim down your chances just to pick up the prices they're willing to pay.
It's more important to know how to interact with someone utilizing these personality traits than how to identify the traits in a person. Because when you can identify how to interact with a person utilizing these traits,
The things that, like, just for an example, that two of the ladies would come over and tend to my.
You may very well be in a position where you need that exploration and experience. It's like that's going to be what it takes both for you to feel satisfied with the level of experience you have and also to get an opportunity to experience genuine consequences from it.
Hello, peace, blessings, glory, praise, and honor to the Most High. Welcome to another episode of Assembly of Excellence. I am your host for this evening, Deep Entropy, Last of a Writer's Creed. Thank you all for tuning in today. I hope all is well with each and every single one of you. So happy to be here with you again. The premiere of Cryptic Creed Paranormal dropped yesterday. If you didn't catch it, make sure you tap in. Hell of a good interview. Shout out to Karen, who gave her story. I enjoyed every second of that one-on-one. If you haven't seen it, you definitely need to check that one out. Shout out to everyone watching from Rumble, Twitter, Twitch, all of my new followers. Thank you so much for tapping in and allowing us to grace your homes with our conversations and just share our thoughts on different matters that goes on around us every single day that tends not to get the same acknowledgement or recognition. We have a good one tonight. Let me bring my partner up here for this discussion. If you're not following him, make sure you check in. Good guy, man. You will love him. Give him a warm welcome. Let's go ahead and get into tonight's topic. If you have any questions or any ideas, any subjects that you would like us to cover now or moving forward, if you have any questions for me or for anyone that joins the panels, or if you want to join the panel, email me. Everything's at the bottom below. Not hard to reach. I'm always available to those who are serious about having these one-on-ones or these conversations in this infrastructure. Mr. Aaron, what is going on, sir?
How's it going, Mel? I'm doing all right. What's the latest? Heard you talking some announcements earlier. You said you got a sounds like some kind of new show or an advancement upon a previous show coming up.
Oh, so Cryptic Creed Paranormal is a show that really talks about people's one-on-one experiences with things that they might have experienced that they can't explain.
That's
You know,
interesting.
something getting, yeah, something getting knocked over. Maybe you saw something that just didn't look feasibly possible to the human eye as something normal. Yeah, it is a pretty dope theme. So far, we've had 4 people come on for different episodes. Shout out to all of them. This last one was a pretty good one. Pretty good one. But what's the word, man? How everything going?
Not a whole lot's going on, man, but I don't mean that in a bad way. Things are starting to relax, be a little low key. I've got a lot of big projects coming up, and you know, I'm like a be about it, don't talk about it type of person. So I don't really like to gas it up too much until I have something ready to show, you know. So big things coming soon. I can't read none of the details yet.
I know. I feel you on that. It's better to keep things where they are until you're actually ready for it to come out. I don't. I think that's probably why a lot of people keep things to themselves specifically because you don't want everybody knowledgeable of what you have going on. Like there's people that will cheer you on and they have the best of intentions, but then there's others that might feel a different way and they could be very poisonous to your purpose, if that makes sense. So nah, I'm one of them people that I would rather not say anything about what I'm doing and then show up with it than show up with it, or just talk about it over and over and over again.
No, that's absolutely felt. My word, my commitment means a lot to me, you know. So it's like I don't like to give somebody a commitment and not be able to follow through with it. It hurts. So like it hurts my pride, you know, not like I consider myself an especially proud individual, but it's like if, you know, if I can't follow through on what I say, then, you know, what could I possibly stand for, right? So it's easier sometimes to keep your mouth shut so that you don't get yourself into trouble with obligations.
Right? You burn a lot of bridges and a lot of relationships just off of your word. That don't mean a lot anymore in 2024 to some people, but it still means something to me. So big respect there. I didn't even give you a chance to even unpack this right here. You're just seeing it for the first time, but I'll give you the cliff notes, and I got the whole definition right here. This is the first time I've heard of this phrase, and I wanted to kind of break it down a little bit for me, you, and for anyone else who probably wasn't too familiar with it. Uh, Dissociative identity disorder. I don't know if you're familiar with it. You might be, and maybe I'm just new to it, but I never heard of it until I came across it just randomly, and I wanted to Google and get the definition so I would be accurate in my assertion of the whole thing. Um, so I'm gonna read it off, and we'll just jump right into it.
Lead the way.
Uh, a disorder categorized by the presence of 2 or more distinct personality states. Dissociative identity disorder, previously called a multiple personality disorder, is usually a reaction to trauma as a way to help a person avoid bad memories. Dissociative identity disorder is characterized by the presence of 2 or more distinct personality identities. Each may have a unique name, personal history, and characteristics. Yeah,
I can take off on that if you want. So I mean, I feel like the best reference point and the worst reference point for it is pop culture, right? You ever seen Split, M. Night Shyamalan with the bald dude who has like 20 different personalities? And then
Professor X.
there was another show they did like great show. I don't know how well they portrayed the disease, but if you've seen a Crowded Room or The Crowded Room with Tom Holland, um, incredible show, super dark, disturbing content material. I think that like my familiarity with dissociative identity disorders, it's like it's split personalities, multiple personalities, right? And I think that commonly gets misconstrued in pop culture with schizophrenia, like hearing voices and stuff like that, but definitely two distinct things. And I would argue like much, much more rare than, than the prevalence of schizophrenia, like hearing and seeing things. I think that, and this does not come from like a real solid psychology education, right? So, I mean, like, bear with me as I talk out of my ass about this topic. I was under the impression that DID occurs most frequently in in patients and victims who experienced extreme abuse, typically of a sexual nature, as young kids. And so when you talk about the different identities having different names and personalities, that's kind of what the form it takes to me is like a child who experiences something terrible that they don't understand, can't process. They create like a self within a self, an alternate version of themselves who can handle that thing, who can handle that trauma, and can get them through the hard times. And I think the issue comes on with later in life having this situation of both of these personalities. You have one that was created under duress, right? Like you have your shit's hitting the fan personality who's ready to pop out and take the wheel, while you may just be trying to work through some stuff and figure out how to, in your home base personality, you're the person you are 90% of the time. I wouldn't want to be giving up the control to like a problem solver personality on a regular basis. I think I'd want to be able to integrate and like deal with those things myself and be able to remember having dealt with all those things. I'll go ahead and yield it right here.
You touched on a couple of points that I thought was interesting, especially tying it into that movie, specifically Split, because I was in an area earlier, and it's typically routine that I see this person. I think everyone has one of these people in wherever they live at. Is always this one person that when you're doing your everyday, this person is always yelling and talking to themselves and always cussing at people, or you think they cussing at people when they're not really cussing at people. They're kind of having conversations with themselves. I don't know if you would consider that this or schizophrenia, but I always asked myself what happened to a person, like what was so extreme. How did it get so bad to the point to where a person could develop an entirely whole separate identity within their own self, utilize that other person as a conduit to tap into parts of who they are originally, to do things that they would normally not do without that influence. And I think this one interests me a lot because what I'm really seeing is a pattern of, is this genetic, or is this something that is developed, or is this something that is inherited? Because I don't believe that you just come out of the womb wanting to self hurt or self harm or you just come out talking yourself like you just all over. I don't see that happening. So someone with a multiple personality, what was so extreme? What brought that on? From what I've read, there's really no real treatment other than therapy for it. But every time I've associated someone with it, they always had anger issues. They were always moody. They always had mood swings. Uh, you didn't know when and where they were going to switch on and off with how they was going to present themselves that day. Do you associate this with biology or something that is just produced over time from dealing with different things in your life?
So again, I want to stress this comes from no background in psychology, right? But I was under the impression, unlike schizophrenia, which has, to my knowledge, a really strong genetic component, right? Like they've identified genes correlated with schizophrenia. There's another good documentary that I do not remember the name of, but it details an entire family. I want to say like an estimated like 12, 11 kids, all the same bloodline, 6 of which went on to have severe schizophrenia and, like associated crimes and life issues. DID, in my experience, I don't know that it has a strong genetic component. I think that DID, if you're familiar with CPTSD, so like childhood post-traumatic stress disorder, I think that you have like a class of symptoms with CPTSD that indicate a person who experienced a lot of trauma as a child, right? And they're, those symptoms are pretty consistent with what you see in adult PTSD conditions, but also have a lot of behaviors that mirror things like autism and ADHD, things like that. To me, it almost seems like the only difference between childhood post-traumatic stress disorder and DID is just the severity of what happened to them, right? Like I think that probably is where the genetic component plays in, right? You might have certain people who are better equipped to emotionally, psychologically handle something terrible happen to them. So I don't think it's necessarily that your genetics predispose you to getting dissociative identity disorder, but I think it's possible that your genetics might be an indicator of if you are a person who would deal with a traumatic event in a way that you would be left with CPTSD afterwards, some kind of like indication of post-traumatic stress, or if you were the type of person who would deal with a traumatic event by dissociating it completely and, inventing a new person to deal with that trauma for you. Does that make sense? I don't think it's necessarily a weakness. Like, I don't think it's fair to say that somebody who creates an identity who can handle whatever torture they're being subjected to, it's not their fault. It's not a deficiency within them. It's like there's certain things that people and children especially shouldn't be subject to, and if that's what it takes to get through it, then I would recommend people do the necessary to get through the hard times in their life. Does that answer your question, Mel?
No, I got what you're saying. And so here's my thing, right? Because what I believe you're framing here is that these type of people who form these I don't want to say disorders, but it's what it's called, a disorder. These type of people who form these things typically use it as an amplifier or a defense mechanism, right? So if you were exposed to violence as a kid, and like your household was full of drama and rage and just it was just out of order. At some point as a child, you see these things, and a part of you is trying to hide from that, or you're trying to protect yourself from ever being in a position to where you can be hurt in those ways again. So you have to find yourself going into a different space to keep out whatever damaging words or any uh, promise of influence could reach to you and turn you into something, or affect you in a way that's going to cause you to do the same things to other people. Maybe I could be wrong, or I could be stretching it a little bit when I say that. But then, what I've noticed with this area specifically is how it turns certain people into bullies, and it turns others into like monsters and psychos and folks that are unstable, and they don't know how. What you're describing is someone who knows how to turn it on and off, and they can kind of. It reminds me of like Yu-Gi-Oh. I don't know if anybody is a cartoon. I'm a cartoon dude. I love anime. It reminded me of Yu-Gi-Oh, where he would switch from personality from the kid to the other dude, and the other dude he had all of the knowledge of different eras in time and all that shit, versus the kid who was still innocent and still had all of his like childhood with him. He wasn't uh, discarded by the world. He still knew how to enjoy life. But the other version of him already knew it was cruel and this, that, and third. So he would go into that person so that he could be able to go out here and do. Maybe that's what you're talking about. I could be wrong. Um, Something that I want to add, and then I'll turn it back over to you, is with all of these disorders and these clinical words that they give and attribute to these cases, I want to say too, just from my opinion, that a lot of this to me is spiritual. A lot of this has spiritual undertones and influence to it. Because again, like I said, I honestly, if you're if you're a scientist or you're a doctor and you've spent years and years of your life studying neuro science, anything in that field, your specialty is brain matter. Would you be able to identify this in a child? Would you be able to know if they had these symptoms? Because I just did a show earlier this week. I believe it was Monday or Tuesday, and it was on body body integrity dysphoria, right? And with that particular case, you're between the ages of 8 and 12 years old, you develop a odd sensation, or like a weird lust for um, self harm, from self mutilation, but but you don't act on it until you become an adult. And once you become an adult, the desire in you to amputate one of your arms or one of your legs is so strong, you don't get any thrill or pleasure out of it until you've actually done it. So yeah, I think there's a lot here. I don't believe it's technically all biologically tied, but I do think there's some other things that go along with this too. I'll turn it back over.
Yeah, so a lot of points I want to dig into here, honestly. So I'm going to start with what I think was one of the first thing you mentioned, right? And so you were describing my take on DID and associated conditions as like, like from the perspective of maybe somebody who can turn it on and off. And I wasn't trying to imply that I think most people can. I think it's more a situation of your body interprets a stimulus, right? Like, say you are being stalked in a dark alley with a knife. You just happen to have DID because you've had experiences like this as an early child, and then all of a sudden uh, your alter ego comes out ready to defend you because it's detected a stimulus that says, okay, main hub personality can't handle this scenario. We're bringing out the dude who can from the back. That's what I think about it. But to address what you said about, turning certain people into bullies, monsters, psychos, I think that you have two schools of thought right here, and neither one of them necessarily disproves the other, right? The one is the obvious, which is like, no matter what the disorder is, there's always going to be people who use that diagnosis as a way to excuse shitty behavior. You know what I mean? It's like if I get a diagnosis of being bipolar, for example, then I can be like, oh, hey, sorry, you have to give me a pass that I, acted out in this way because I was having a manic episode. Or, hey, I need you to bear with me on, not being able to meet my deadlines because I was having a depressive episode. You know what I mean? People with a disorder, they have to learn how to manage that in order to be able to function well in society. And it's like we can hope that people are willing to meet us halfway and understand that we might have some kind of disorder that we're processing and that we're doing our best. But I think there's plenty of people who will use that disorder as an excuse to not bother with any kind of self-improvement. That's something I can't get behind. But the alternative is that they are not using their diagnosis as an excuse. Their alternate personality genuinely is an asshole, right? And that could make sense. Like if I was experiencing sexual abuse as a child and I developed a personality who could tolerate it, that's probably going to be a stone cold motherfucker who can handle things that no child should ever have to. So if that alternate personality that I invented to be able to deal with something terrible is a bully, is a monster, is a psycho, I mean, I'm not going to say that the behavior is justified, but more like from that context, you can see how the behavior was expected, at least. When you asked about could you identify this in a child if you were like a neuroscience specialty because of their brain matter and whatnot, I think it's probably really subject to fallibility. Like it's probably easy to screw up, but I mean, you can do CAT scans on the brain and other MRI resonance imaging and take a look at healthy versus schizophrenic brains, and you can see evidence of difference, right? So it's like I imagine that there's no reason I couldn't scan the brain of a child, and if the activity that I was seeing mirrored that typical of a schizophrenic person, I could probably begin to assume this child may have something going on like that. I don't have any experience with this, obviously, but in my mind, the way I see it, if someone was claiming to have DID and we took a brain scan, from one personality allegedly and another one from the next personality, and there was a clear difference in brain activity, to me that would be, again, the start of some hard evidence, right? Like if you are claiming to be one of two different personalities at two different time points, and each personality comes with its own distinct set of brain activity, I mean, to me that mirrors evidence. I think the last thing I wanted to cover that you mentioned was the desire to act on self-harm increases with age. And I'm honestly just curious to know why you think that is, because I absolutely agree with you. I think that it's well known that mental illness of any kind tends to manifest somewhere between the mid to late 20s. And so like a lot of kids, they'll be showing warning signs of it during adolescence. And that's when you described the lust for self-harm starts to manifest. I think that what you said about, once they hit adulthood, it really starts to kick in, is very consistent with the folklore that mental illness manifests in mid to late 20s. So I mean, like, I don't have an explanation for that other than I think, like, by that point in your life you start to realize that you really are in charge of your own destiny for the most part. You are subject to the consequences of your own actions. I think the reason mental illness manifests then for me personally is just because that's the first time I have autonomy and responsibility as an adult. And I mean, like, real autonomy, right? It's like you could say that someone's an adult at 18 or at 21, but they're life experience wise still just a child in an adult's body, right? I feel like you've heard that it takes until what is it, like 26 for the brain to finish developing altogether. So I think, the completion of the brain development around that time frame is to me why mental illness can take so long to show up. What do you think, boss?
I was real puzzled and real baffled by just the name alone, body integrity dysphoria. I never heard of it. I never associated it with anything regarding mental illnesses of any sort. And then when I really read about what it was and what it does, I sat here for about an hour trying to figure this out. What could happen in a person's life to put that type of suggestive thinking into a person to where that would be something of a desire? I've heard of people obsessed with feet. There's people who like to be in bondages and people who like to worship and do all types of kinky shit. I've heard of that. I've never thought that it was possible that a person could develop something that would say, I don't like my arm, I don't like my leg, I don't like certain parts of my body. I need to get rid of it. If I get rid of it, I will be okay. I will feel better. And between this one and the one that we're speaking on right now, and there's something that you threw up that I want to go into here in a second. What this has done is shown me that there's a number of different uh, personality traits, um, different different things that go on with people mentally that we just don't understand or know. And some stuff you can see right away, other things you can't spot on. I would love to know what it would look like under a CAT scan, how the brain works when the way the patterns of one switch to the next. I would love to see how that looks, because it's like you turn it on and off switch. I I don't know. If I was in that position, I guess that would probably be a marvel, especially if you studied that field for a majority of your life. I would definitely be excited. One, because this is something that typically does not get highlighted enough. It's something that I'm sure scientists have struggled with for ages upon ages, but also because now we have a focal point. Now we have something that we can look at. Now, is there, let's say that this happens and you can see the patterns, you can see the transitions. Does that mean that there's a way to stop that? Can you control it? Can you medically do something to keep that from happening? And if possible, is that a good or a bad thing? There's a number of ways to look at that. Now, the The other thing that I wanted to go into, because you brought it up and I thought it was like, damn, you know what? Why not go into it? You said something about adults still acting, well, I'm not quoting you, but you said adults that still have characteristics of children. There's a lot of men and women who still act like they in high school, still act like they in elementary school. They're just in adult bodies. Is that a mental disorder? Or is that just you just don't want to grow up?
Should I pick it up from here?
Be my guess.
Okay, so I mean, honestly, I'm gonna work backwards this time, just because I liked what you said. Children in adult bodies, is that a mental disorder? I think that there, you touched on a really, really complicated subject right here, because I think it depends entirely on who's the judge, right? Like I think that I've seen piss poor, embarrassingly terrible behavior from adults, right? You know, like especially adults close to me, involved in my upbringing, and like, you know, I can confidently say I've witnessed childlike behavior from people in their 30s and 40s. So like, for me, I don't know if my meter for detecting what is adult versus child behavior is properly calibrated for the average person. Somebody who had a more well-rounded upbringing might do a better job of assessing an adult's behavior and going, you know, you're grown. What is this? We don't tolerate this kind of childlike behavior here. But I think it can be a mental disorder, and I don't know what it would be if it was. Like, if you have you ever heard of like regression? There's situations in which I want to say it's related to the PTSD response, right? But like, say something terrible, god awful happened to you, like you were out with your family, got into a brutal car accident, every single one of them passed away. There's been cases where people will then regress to a childlike state as a way of dealing with this traumatic, terrible thing that's happened to them, right? And it's almost just like another form of some of the other disorders that we discussed previously, like, you know, with the DID being the creation of another person to deal with it. I almost feel like regression is taking away the person that was there so they don't have to deal with it. I'm sure they'll come back at some point, but it's like, rather than inventing somebody, contriving somebody who can deal with that scenario, they are taking somebody who can't deal with that scenario and almost just like throwing it in reverse, backing it up to a kid who doesn't understand what's going on. So that way it kind of just flies right over the top of their head. I wanted to make a point on just dissociation, period. So if you're familiar with dissociation, it's become like kind of a buzzword nowadays. And I think, to me, dissociation just sort of means this idea of the lights are on but nobody's home, right? Like, if I'm dissociating, somebody may very well have a conversation with me in which I seem lucid and I talk and have a discussion with them. It's probably not all that interesting, that I have no memory of doing afterwards, but I don't feel like it's me jumping into an alternate personality. I think it's more just a situation of going on autopilot, right? You could think of it like regression, but if the instead of defaulting to childlike behaviors, just defaulting to brainless, low effort, doing the bare minimum to get through it kind of thing. If you've ever had like a Monday that you woke up and you're like, damn, I do not feel equipped to go to work right now, but you do it anyways out of force of habit. To me, that's like a pinnacle routine example of using dissociation as a strategic tool, which is basically just like, hey, this thing I got to do, it's going to suck, so I'm going to go to my happy place while I do it. I feel like I'm kind of bouncing all over the place, but it's interesting to hear you parallel body integrity with dissociative identity, because it's almost like With the DID, we've got something psychologically that is there, then it's there, and maybe it shouldn't have been. Body integrity seems like the physical version of something that is there and feels like it shouldn't be. I think that I did a little research myself on body integrity dysmorphia while you were talking, and or dysphoria, and it's interestingly enough, it says the risk factors are knowing an amputee as a child, and in a case study that they discovered that somebody showed on an MRI less brain matter associated with the the feeling and function of that part of the body, and basically came to the conclusion that that the person who felt like they wanted to remove their leg coincidentally was missing brain matter in that spot that would make a person feel attached to their leg, both physically and emotionally. So I guess it stands to reason that if we can map the physical desire to want to remove a limb to align ourselves with a better mirroring of how we feel connected to our body, you'd think that there might be some evidence of that same thing psychologically, right? Like if you can see a difference in brain activity between a regular person and someone who wants to remove their arm, I feel like you should be able to discern some kind of difference in a regular person and somebody who has an alternate personality that is radically different. I don't want to yap too much here, so I don't think I had any more notes to share on that. You want to take over here?
Yeah. To be honest, with science and the way things are, how we have all of these developments with medicines, and we practice all of these usage for new tools and things of that nature, I would like to believe that there's a way that you could go into someone's person, not physically, but put them under the microscope, run your test, and see firsthand what happens. Now, I know there's been studies, sleep studies and things of that nature, where they track your sleep patterns and all of those different things. But I would really like to know what they found in terms of how the brain works. It's never really been something that I was too into. I've thought about it, but I've never thought about it to the extreme to where I was getting on social media looking for it, right? It's only now where I'm just I need to have a clearer head. I need to have a healthier way of operating from logic and things of that nature. What am I holding on to things? Am I, like you said, regressing? Am I doing anything that would associate me with any of these diagnoses or symptoms? That's ultimately what this is. It's really for people to think a little bit harder about where they are, how they conduct themselves, how they carry themselves. Are you communicating the way that you would like to? Do you have a problem communicating a way that you would like? Maybe you want to be a little more articulate, but you don't know how. Maybe you're hot-tempered. Maybe there's some things here that might tie into your development as you grew up. Something to think about. I agree. I couldn't pinpoint or say one way or another. A lot of this, I do believe, to some extent, has to do with passing it on from a family member or so. I still have this inkling in me that it was like an assignment of a spiritual sense pushed out there in a way to keep you from developing fully into the person that you're supposed to. It's almost like being sabotaged on purpose. I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. So, hypothetically, you have a group of people, let's say 4 people, they're all close to you. Y'all pretty much grew up together, but there's always one person that tends to be the black sheep in that fun group. You just kind of passively aggressively pay it no mind because you just say, "Oh well, that's just them." But they're always the one that's and you decide to share some news with the group. Well, everybody seems to be happy. They give you words of affirmation, but then there's always is that one person that says something completely out of realm that just throws the whole vibe off. To me, that's someone planting a seed of discord. They're trying to suggestively say they want you to slip up or they want you to fail. They don't want you to succeed, but they say it in such a well decorated way that you don't recognize it right away. That's kind of how I'm looking at this from a spiritual sense. Because when you said that there was a piece that was missing that identifies feeling in that specific area, how does that happen? How do you just develop that? You know what I'm saying? So I don't know. You could look at it medically if that's what you prefer. I kind of do it this way. Um, as far as the developing these habits where you're an adult, the regression, things of that nature. With some people, I can see that happening. I can. Where do we draw the line? You know, because there's men who act completely like spoiled children or just violent and like where does that go? How do you what's that about? Like so you think it's all right to spend your life in the street, call it survival tactics or whatever. I think that's an excuse because you don't want to live to your fullest potential, but that's neither here nor there. Or a woman who decides that she wants to be out here selling her body is, but I come to you as a friend or someone who cares about you, and I'm telling you this is not this no, this is not it. And you get all huffy and puffy, you gaslight, you throw fits, you have all these little attitude issues, and you acting like a brat when someone's trying to hold you accountable. Is that I don't know how I feel about it. I don't know. It's tricky, man. It's really tricky because I can see in some instances where maybe you got in a car accident, you lost your parents or something, and you don't want to relive that pain over and over and over again. So you try to find ways to manage with that. But then on the flip side, let's say you grew up with horrible ass parents, they still alive, but they showed you nothing but ratchet behavior. So you turn into what they showed you. You see where I'm going with the contrast? The mind is a interesting muscle.
Definitely an interesting
So,
muscle. Sorry, were you finished up right there?
yeah. Go ahead.
I'll pick it up. So you said a couple things that stuck out to me that I wanted to dig into, and I think it's the best place we start with is what it sounded like you were just talking about, right? Like you see this example of quote unquote ratchet behavior, or otherwise just like a poor way of being laid out to you by your parents, and you proceed to become that, right? I think I you see the same thing with like chronic abusers, right? You've probably heard of generational trauma, where it's like, you know, my granddad beat my dad's ass, so my dad beats my ass, so now I beat my kid's ass. That's like the real dumbed down version of generational trauma, which is just like you were subject to this, so now you have a guideline for how to behave, a bad one, and also like a feeling of justification, like because this happened to me, it's my responsibility to now enforce it on somebody else. But the other thing I think a lot of people don't think about is that trauma rewrites your DNA, and this one is a little bit more. Um, it sounds more woo woo, even though it's rooted in science. So like when people go through something terrible, it's not just like a psychological effect that it has on them. Their body responds by making adjustments to their DNA that are going to express adaptations that physically will help them overcome what happened. I am going to absolutely botch this evidence, but it calls to mind a study they did. I want to say it was with several like middle-aged men from a certain spot, Scandinavian heritage, so like white European dudes experienced some kind of insane famine. And because of that famine, it activated some latent gene in their bloodline that would go on to make all of these Scandinavian descendants exceptionally healthy. This was an example of this idea that like something terrible, in this case a famine, can alter the DNA of the victims, the people involved, and cause even their descendants to display this gene of ultra health. So I wish I could provide more evidence because I want people to be able to find that article that I did. I think it's what happens with generational trauma that people don't get is it's not just the psychological impact, but it's the physical impact. Receiving that generational trauma, it doesn't just change your mind, it changes you like throughout every cell in your body. So I think where that comes into holding people accountable for the attitude issues that may come about as a direct result of that is that's more a question of philosophy to me, right? Like if their behavior and their attitude is having a direct negative effect on me personally, then I might very well talk to them and be like, hey, I don't agree with this thing that you're getting up to. I don't like that you are risking our freedom by committing crime. I don't like that you are setting an example for our children by selling your body, something like that. But the thing is that I think that's where I draw the line is, does it have a direct impact on me? I don't think it's my place to be given that kind of counsel, especially unasked for, to people who I think might benefit from it, because I think people naturally get defensive when they're being told that they're doing something wrong. And I think an even deeper question is that, like, am I so in the right that I am able to make the call that this person's in the wrong, right? So it's like, not only do I risk aggravating somebody who may feel victimized by me calling attention to their behavior, but it's like, if it isn't bothering me, and if I don't have it all figured out, who am I to go casting stones in glass houses? You know what I mean? That's my stance on the subject, right? I'm not ever going to get after somebody who is doing something that I may think is immoral or unethical if there's no direct influence to me or people I love. If there is, I'm going to handle that on a case-by-case basis. And, as it relates back to the trauma they experienced, right, that's up to me to decide if I think that what this person went through that lent itself to that way of being and that behavior if I think that it is, if it's something that can be helped, if it's something that deserves to be helped, I think it's just, I wish it was as easy as giving an algorithm to knowing when somebody's trauma made them justifiably ill and what we could do for them. But like in my experience, it's always been a cost versus benefits analysis, right? Does knowing this person, despite their flaws, bring enough value to my life to make worthwhile the detriments to knowing them? I'm gonna pass it over here because I feel like I've really gone in circles with this one.
No, you've pretty much been, as detailed, even going from point to point. I still think everything tied into each other in some form or fashion, whether or not it was directly going in one direction or another, they still intertwine. So for me personally, I'm with you in terms of not sticking my nose where it doesn't belong when it doesn't directly tie into me or anyone close to me. But the reason why I find this so profound and important to discuss is because, for one, there may be this this feeling of, well, it's not my problem. However, I look at it like having knowledge and not sharing it is just as wasteful as having fruit and just letting it rot and you don't do anything with it. What's the point of having it if you're not going to eat healthy? What's the point of knowing things if you're not going to share it? Sharing it by itself is enough. You don't have to jump in front of somebody swinging a butcher knife to contribute to maybe helping somebody figure out, well, I knew something wasn't right with me. They don't necessarily have all of the context or all of the verbiage and the answers to what is actually happening here. But what they've done is open a lane for me to where instead of me constantly going this way, I can go this way too, or I can go that way too. Now I have more space to explore and figure out what's happening with me personally. And maybe I can pass this to somebody else that might need it. Another reason why, even though it's not directly my responsibility, the fact of the matter still doesn't change. We're speaking probabilities and possibilities. So the probability of you walking into somebody or being around someone who is a danger to you and everyone around you is really not that off. I mean, stuff happens. You can't predict that. The thing is we in a time zone where everybody just wants to pick up their phone and record. So if you got time to pick up your phone, you got time to be productive and actually do something other than gossip and record and post and comment. Like, where my thing is, where's the energy going? Do you just turn your head and just continue walking when you see something happening? Or do you at least try to say something? My final thoughts on this in general: we all have things. Nobody's perfect. Some might have things that are a little more intense than others, but the whole point of the stream and the conversation is to have the conversation, to really think about it. You might not be in this, but it might be something else that's holding you back in a bad way, not necessarily in a good way. I'm talking about like it's like we got a mental dam here, and then everything that is good is being restricted. Something is blocking it, and you need to remove this so that it can flow. That's what I'm speaking about. Uh, you made a lot of takes that I really enjoyed hearing. Uh, always appreciate your feedback. I don't think you were off by much of anything. And like I said, I don't know too much about any of this either. I'm just coming into it myself. So I just felt like this was probably the perfect time to discuss it. You know what I'm saying? So that's all I got to say in terms of that. If you got anything that you want to say to the people, though, before we go, you're more than welcome. Shout out to everybody that pulled up to watch with us tonight. I appreciate that very much.
Yeah, no, I just want to say thanks to anyone who took time out of their day to listen to us shoot the shit. I like where you're coming from, Mel. I do think people would do really well to be mindful of where they channel their energy. And I do like the analogy of the sharing of the fruit. I guess my only note to add would be like I wouldn't force my fruit to somebody who wasn't hungry, right? I think there are already so many people out there who were desperate for this gift to be received, right? It's almost as if there is not enough of the gift to go around to everyone who need it. And the real struggle is finding people who are hungry and people who are ready to receive it versus, making the mistake in my mind of investing the energy into trying to share that fruit with people who are not ready to hear it yet. And I hope you can see things from that perspective as well. This has been a great conversation, Mel. As always, that's all I got for you today.
Much love, brother. And shout out to you and shout out to everybody that's been watching. We will reconvene next week. Tomorrow is the virtual open mic. Do me a favor, hit that thumbs up on your way out. I hope you guys enjoy your evening and your weekend. Tomorrow is Friday. God bless. This is Assembly Excellence signing out.